Not every American tank built was destined for the U.S. Army. Some were transported through the Persian corridor into Russia. From the steelworks of Detroit straight to the Eastern Front. And it wasn't just tanks that wound up in Russia. The Americans sent experienced combatants too. Colonel Peters had joined the Russian advance into Romania. With the news spreading that a second front had opened up in France, both sides knew this was a critical turning point in the war. From his position on the hill, Peters and his Russian crew were about to get their first taste of action as a joint force. The German preemptive strike had been fierce, the Soviet losses heavy. Regardless, the orders still stood. The Russian offensive would continue as planned. Colonel Peters suddenly found himself caught up with the push towards the enemy front line. The Russian Shermans had managed to stem the German onslaught, but they lacked the necessary reinforcements to press home their advantage. One thing was clear to Peters: they needed more tanks. It was now a race against time for the Russians. They could make for the disabled tank and turn it against their enemy, or engage the German patrol directly with the remaining Shermans. Peters prayed they would make the right call. Peters rallied his crew. In one bloody morning, the advantage had swung from the Germans back to the Soviets. The preemptive strike had been curtailed. Peters, bolstered with captured enemy tanks, rejoined the main Russian force for the final assault. As they bore down on the German position, Peters was comforted by the thought that, if he fell, he would die surrounded by men he'd be proud to call brothers. This was it. If Peters could smash the enemy front, Germany would be pushed out of Romania. The battle had been intense and lasted several hours. The Germans had fought with dogged tenacity. The German defenses had crumbled as the Shermans punched a hole right through them. Now, nothing could stop Russia from knocking the Romanians out of the Axis. This day, this victory, belonged to Peters and his crew. Ringing in his ears, Peters found himself surrounded by his fellow crew members. Their shared ordeal had bonded them together. Now, these fresh orders were wrenching them apart. Peters may have missed out fighting alongside his men in Normandy, but here, on the Eastern Front, he had found new brothers in armor he could stand shoulder to shoulder with.